I used to think teaching reading meant starting with the ABCs, but after 9 years of doing it the Montessori way, I can tell you that's exactly backwards. I started reading about Montessori when I was pregnant with my son, so I knew bits and pieces of the philosophy and I tried to implement it whatever I could at home. But it wasn't until I did my proper Montessori training that I understood just how brilliant this approach is, because it's not just a method, it's fundamentally rooted in how children actually develop. And when it comes to learning to read, the Montessori approach is completely different from what most of us grew up with. After using it with both of my kids, who are wildly different learners, I can tell you that it works. And not because it's trendy or it's progressive, but because it follows the child's own timeline. And what surprised me most was that we didn't start with reading, we started with writing. So children are in a sensitive period for language from birth to about 6 years old. When a baby is born, they know no language. And by age 2, 2.5, they're fluently speaking whatever language or languages are around them. That fluency would take adults years to achieve if we ever even get there. But children just absorb it so effortlessly, like it just comes so naturally to them. And that's why the foundations for reading and writing actually happen from when the child is born. I like to call it the 3 S's, just so it's easy to remember: speech, song, and stories. So speech is all about talking to them with really rich language instead of baby talk. I mean, of course, we did a little bit of baby talk. I mean, you just can't resist it with a little baby. But where we could, we tried to use as much rich language as possible. So when we were doing things like changing the kid's nappy or doing a chore around the house and the baby was there, I would try to describe it to them, speak to them like I was speaking to another person. So they're absorbing real adult language, rich language, rather than just stuff that's been abbreviated for a baby. So for example, if we're out for a walk and there's a dog, instead of saying, "Oh look, do you see the doggy?" I'd say, "Hey, look at that adorable golden retriever across the street." And before you know it, your child is going to look at you one day and say, "Hey, mommy, do you see the golden retriever over there?" And you're going to be blown away that your 2-year-old knows what a golden retriever is. But the only way that's going to happen is if they've actually had the exposure. Songs, especially the nursery rhymes that we sing to kids, they might seem like, oh, they're just nursery rhymes. They're so annoying. How many times do I have to sing the same thing? But nursery rhymes are so important because they expose kids to language. There's a lot of repetition, there's rhythm, the actions associated with the words that they're learning help a child to understand language and to internalize that vocabulary. Stories, books, these were something that we would read to the kids from when they were babies, from pretty much as soon as they could lie down and focus. When they were able to sit in our laps or sit unassisted, we started story time every single night. Now here's something about us. We would be very particular about buying toys. Like, I was really specific. I would research the toys a lot, make sure they were wooden, high quality, educational. But when it came to books, any book, we would buy them, literally any book. The good ones, the bad ones. If they wanted a book, we would buy it for them, no questions asked. Sometimes I would even buy them 20 books at a time because the more they read, the better. We started off with 1 or 2 books a night. And then I remember at one point we were reading my son 5 or 6 books before bedtime every single night. That's not even counting the ones we'd read to him during the day. All of this is so important because the type of language that they're exposed to through daily speech is very important from the type of language that they're exposed to in songs, which is then very different from stories, which is very different from poems. All of these different things have very different language structures and styles, so that when the child is actually ready for reading, all of that foundation has already been laid. They've been exposed to so much. So this is where the more formal preparation for reading and writing begins. And it starts with, okay, when you start reading words, right? But what makes up words? Most people would say letters. But if you actually listen to a word like chair, yes, it's got letters C-H-A-I-R. But chair sounds nothing like C-H-A-I-R. Chair sounds like ch-e-r. So actually words are made up of different sounds, phonemes. And this stage is all about building that phonemic awareness, which is being able to hear the sounds that make up words. So for example, chair is ch-e-r. Being able to hear that chair has those 3 sounds, you need to be able to hear the beginning sound, ch, the middle sound, eh, and the ending sound, er. Now this might come instinctively to us, and I know it doesn't come instinctively to a lot of adults because that's just not how we were taught, but it definitely does not come instinctively to children. It takes a lot and a lot and a lot of sound games in order for them to get there, and all of that is part of the preparation. So we played a lot of sound games. I Spy games are the best for this. We would play this all the time in the car. I spy with my little eye something beginning with t, tree. Or I spy with my little eye something beginning with k, car. So you'd always start with the beginning sounds, then you move to ending sounds, and maybe you combine the beginning and ending sounds. Then you introduce the middle sound. And that's how a child learns to break down words into all of their component sounds. Now at this stage, we also started with some matching and visual discrimination activities. So we would have objects, we would match an object to an object to a picture. So we'd have these beautiful schley animals. I don't know if I'm saying that right. And my son would match a schley animal to a picture of a schley animal. And along the way, he would also be learning the words for them if he didn't already know it. So this can also happen when you're on the road and the child sees, say, a car, and then they see a picture of a car in their book. Or they see a giraffe and they see a picture of giraffe in their book. That is object to picture matching, you know? So it doesn't just have to look like an activity on a shelf with like a flashcard and an object. It can be anywhere. But the big emphasis at this stage is on sounds. My children didn't even learn the names of letters until they were much older, maybe 5 or even 6 years old. My 5-year-old still doesn't know the names of all of her letters very well, but she knows the sounds associated with each letter because that's how she's learned it, and that's what she does. That's what she uses to form words. Now here's where Montessori gets really clever with the sequence. Writing actually comes before reading, which sounds backwards to most people, but there's a solid reasoning behind it. Writing is surprisingly straightforward when you break it down. Think about what happens when you write, right? You have a word in your head, you break it down into its sounds, then you find a symbol for each sound, and that's it, you've written. So if your child wants to write dog, they think of the word, they break it into its sounds, d, o, g, then they match each sound to its symbol, d for the d, o for the o, g for the g. Done, they've written their first word. Reading, on the other hand, is way more complex. The big difference is that with writing, the word starts in your child's head. It's their thought. But with reading, someone else wrote that word. And now your child has to decode what that other person was thinking. So they see cup on a page. First, they have to identify each letter, C, U, P, which means they have to know their letter symbols. Then they attach sounds to each letter. Next comes the tricky part. They have to blend those sounds together. Then they need to recognize that this combination of sounds means something, attach meaning to it, and then put it in context if they're reading a sentence. Writing has maybe 3 steps. Reading has at least 6. And that's why Montessori starts with writing, because it's a more direct path to literacy. There are 2 key Montessori materials for this stage, and I had both of them in our home because they are absolute game changers. Sandpaper letters and the movable alphabet. Sandpaper letters are genius in their simplicity. Each letter gets its own board. Consonants on pink boards, vowels on blue ones. Each letter itself is cut from sandpaper, so when your child traces it, they can feel the texture difference from the smooth board underneath. Now, using this material engages 3 senses at once. They see the letter visually, they feel it tactilely as they trace, and they hear it auditorily when they say the sound. So multiple sensory pathways are being used in this material, and that means stronger memory formation. They learn better. This is classic Montessori thinking. But here's where it gets exciting. By this stage, your child knows all of their letter sounds. Now they're learning that each sound has a symbol through the sandpaper letters. Once they know the symbols for all of the consonants and vowels, they can technically write any word they can think of. Enter the movable alphabet. Picture this, your 3 or 4-year-old wants to write, I went to the park and saw a dog, but their little hands aren't ready for pencil control. No problem. They can already compose the word dog because they know the sounds. So they get out the movable alphabet on a mat and they build their words letter by letter. So they're writing without the need to actually hold a pencil and physically write. So we're separating the cognitive skill of writing from the actual fine motor skill. Let's take a more complicated word. Say they're trying to write chair. They might write it as C-H-E-R because they're hearing the sounds phonetically. They hear ch, e, r, so they're writing C-H-E-R. And that's completely okay because they're hearing the sounds phonetically, and that's exactly what should happen at this age. They're demonstrating that they understand the fundamental concepts that words are made of sounds and sounds have symbols. The conventional spellings and tricky letter combinations come much later once this foundation is rock solid. The beauty here is that they're already thinking like writers and readers. They just don't know it yet. To them, it's just a fun little game. And here's the beautiful thing about all of that work with the movable alphabet. There comes a moment when your child has built a word or a sentence, and then they naturally try to read back what they've written or read back what someone else has written. And that's your signal. They're ready to make this leap into more formal reading. The Montessori progression for reading begins with simple phonetic words, your classic CVC combinations, which is consonant, vowel, consonant, like dog, cat, mat. It's nothing fancy, it's just words that sound exactly like they're spelled. So one of my favorite materials in the Montessori language scheme are the object boxes, which you can easily set up at home. And this is actually the first proper reading activity that a child would do. All you need to do is get a small box or tray or whatever and fill it with miniature objects. You might have a tiny cat, a tiny dog, a tiny cow. I've got a cat, a drum, a jug, and then you need to write out these little labels with those words. Your child finds the cat, picks up the label with the word cat, sounds it out, k, a, t, and discovers that they can read it. This is their first formal introduction to reading, and it starts with single words that they can connect to real objects. Everything begins with the concrete in Montessori, remember? And then from there, the progression gradually introduces digraphs, puzzle words, which are those tricky non-phonetic ones, and different spelling patterns. And each challenge slowly builds on the last. Now, most homes don't have access to every Montessori language material you'd find in a classroom, and that's perfectly fine. The principles matter more than having every single piece of material. I didn't have every one of them in my home. I had the object boxes, and then I had another program, which I'm going to tell you about. But here's what really accelerated my kids' reading. We had already been reading to them every night. So when I could see that they were starting to show interest in reading simple books, we created a routine. They read one book to me first, something right at their level, not too challenging, but not too simple either, and then I would read them their bedtime story. It became this natural trade-off. You do your reading first, then I'll do mine. Since they always wanted their bedtime story, they'd tackle their own book first because they knew what was coming after. And building that daily reading habit before bed honestly propelled their progress more than any single material could have, because the confidence comes from consistent, low-pressure practice, not from being pushed or from being tested. Once they were comfortable with reading lots of individual words, we introduced them to early readers. The Bob books are fantastic for this stage because the first ones use really simple patterns like Matt sat, Sam sat. All of these are three-letter phonetic words arranged in actual little books, so kids feel like they're reading something real. We also use the Oxford Reading Tree series, which has a really good progression through different levels. And usually by level 5 or 6, they're reading fluently and choosing books independently. I think this is around a level 4 or 5 maybe. The magic wasn't in having every Montessori material. It was in following the child's lead and making reading feel natural and enjoyable, rather than this chore or homework that they had to do or a skill they had to master. So I mentioned earlier that we didn't have access to all of the traditional Montessori language materials at home. What we did have was the Waseca reading program. And honestly, that has been a lifesaver. What I love about the Waseca reading program is how closely it aligns with Montessori principles. It seamlessly blends writing and reading. So children form words first and then they read them back. And that's exactly how natural literacy development happens. So the program uses a series of color-coded levels, and each level targets a specific phonetic challenge. So it starts with the red level, which is CVC words, and then it gradually introduces digraphs and more complex patterns. There are 8 or 9 levels in total, so kids can see their progression visually. And within each level, there are 7 sub-levels that break things down even further. So if you're working on CVC words, the first sub-level focuses entirely on words with ah in the middle, so you get 6 different ah words. Then you move to eh words, and then eh, and then ah, and ah, and then you mix combinations. This really systematic approach helps children to master each vowel sound thoroughly before moving on, so there's no rushing and there are no gaps in their understanding. Now, every single sub-level follows the same 4-step sequence. I've got the green level 6 here to illustrate, just because it's what I had handy. So in each level, your child gets 6 picture cards, like that. They look at each picture. Let's just pretend this is a cat. Let's say it's a cat, and then they use the movable alphabet to build the word. They hear cat, k, a, t. They break it into sounds. They find C, A, and T from the movable alphabet. And there we go. They're writing without actually writing. So that's the first step, to form the words that they see. Step 2 is to check. So now they get matching word labels. So they pick up a label, they read the word, at, blend the sounds, and say cat. Then they find the cat picture and they compare it to the word that they have built with their letters. Did they spell it right? This is completely self-correcting, which is also classic Montessori. Next comes a little booklet with similar pattern words. So if they're doing CVC words with ah, then it could be other words like mat, hat, bat, basically more words following the same pattern that they just mastered. So they read through this little booklet. And finally, they get a worksheet where they practice writing those 6 words with a pencil. These 4 steps beautifully combine all of the literacy skills: word building, reading, self-correction, handwriting. Everything flows logically from one step to the next. The beauty of the Waseca reading program is that it's structured but not rigid. So some weeks we do 1 level every day, and other times we'd go months without even touching it, and that was perfectly fine because we followed our children's interest and their energy levels and what they were being called to do. Now, Waseca sells these beautiful rainbow-colored drawer systems, but they're based in the US and shipping internationally costs a fortune. So I bought the digital versions, printed and laminated everything at home, and bound each booklet myself. Both kids have used these materials and they're still in excellent condition years later. I've actually written a detailed review of the entire Waseca reading program on my blog, breaking down exactly what's included at each level and how we used it in our home. So if you're considering it for your family, I have a promo code that gets you $15 off. You can find both the review and the discount code in the description below. What kids love about this system is how predictable it is, right? Because they know exactly what to expect. They can see what's coming next. There's a progress chart that shows them all of the levels, so they're always excited about reaching the next color. This systematic nature, I feel, removes anxiety, builds confidence, because they're not guessing what might come next. They can see their path forward very clearly. This is probably the hardest thing for us as parents to accept, but every single child develops at their own pace. And I've seen this pan out so clearly with my own 2 kids, because they approached reading and writing in completely different ways and at totally different ages. My son was obsessed with the movable alphabet. Like, he'd spend ages building words and he picked up reading really quickly. But getting him to actually write with a pencil, that was like pulling teeth. My daughter was the complete opposite. She loved the writing part, loved forming letters on paper, but she wasn't as interested in the movable alphabet work early on. My older one got into the Waseca program when he was quite young and sailed through it, and my daughter wasn't remotely interested in it until she was older. And you know what? That was perfectly fine. When she was finally ready, she absolutely flew through those levels. Look, I get it. You're at a play date and another mom mentions her 4-year-old is reading chapter books and suddenly you're panicking because your child is still working on letter sounds. It's so hard not to compare. It's completely human nature. But just remember this, every child has their own internal clock for this stuff. They have different strengths, different interests, different ways that their brain processes information. So comparing them is honestly just torture for everyone involved. Stop doing it. Now, here are some questions I get asked all of the time. My child is 6 and still not reading fluently. Should I be worried? Honestly, not if they're progressing in every other area and they're getting better at hearing sounds and words. Can they attach sounds to letters? Are they interested in books and stories? Then they're doing exactly what they should be doing. Don't worry. How do I know if my child is on track? Here's the thing, there is no on track. There's just your child's track. And the more you try to force it or rush it, the more likely they're going to resist it. And I've seen this happen so many times. But what if they're behind? Behind compared to what? Has anyone ever asked you when you learned to read? Of course not, because it literally doesn't matter once you're an adult whether you read at 4 or 7. Don't look at what other people's kids are doing in real life or on social media. Don't compare your child to mine or to anyone else's because you're seeing highlight reels, not real life. You have no idea what struggles are happening behind those perfect posts or those perfect stories. Instead, watch your own child. What are they curious about? What captures their attention? Follow their lead, not some timeline you found on Pinterest or Instagram. And if I could give you just one piece of advice about preparing for your child's reading, it would be this. Read to them every single day. Fill your house with books. Show them that reading is enjoyable, not a chore that they have to master by a certain age. Because the truth is, children who love books and stories will learn to read when they're ready. And when they do, they'll have all of the tools that they need to learn everything else in life so much more easily. The goal isn't to create early readers. It's to create lifelong readers who see literacy as a joy, not a race that they have to win. If you take nothing else away from this whole conversation, please hear this. The absolute best thing you can do to prepare your child for reading is simply read to them every single day. I know I mentioned a language cheat sheet earlier. It gives you a rough idea of what language activities kids typically work on at different ages. But please remember those ages are just general guidelines. They're not rules or requirements. If your child isn't doing something on schedule, that doesn't mean anything is wrong. It just means that they're following their own timeline. I've put links in the description for everything that we talked about today, the pre-reading activities, the overview of how Montessori approaches language, and that detailed Waseca review with the discount code. So just pop in and take whatever interests you the most. Now I'm really curious, where is your child right now on their reading journey? What has been working for your family and what's driving you a little bit crazy? Drop me a comment and tell me about it because I love hearing about different families' experiences because every single one is so unique. And if you want to chat more about any of this stuff, come find me on Instagram at East to West Mama. I'm always sharing what we're up to at home, answering questions, and honestly, watching kids discover that they can read never gets old. It's still one of my favorite things about what I do. There is no perfect way to do this. There is no perfect timeline. There are no perfect materials. There's just your family, your child, and the joy of discovering language together. So enjoy.